And a lot of you guys want us to cover this story, and I do think it's really interesting.
Yes.
And
so we listened to the whole thing. Let's put that at the very top.
Yes. So, okay.
Both of us.
Dr. Robert Malone, who has become very prominent, especially in those who will call vaccine hesitant and also anti-vaxxers, like outright anti-vaxxers. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast for a lengthy interview. We both listened to all of it.
The entire thing.
So that we could be educated on who this individual was, what exactly he was saying, what arguments he was making. He also then afterwards went on InfoWars.
Which Krystal listened to and I did not.
Which I also listened to. And we'll get into a little bit more of the substance of what he's saying, et cetera. But it was interesting to me that clearly with Rogan, he knows Rogan is smart. He can be, skeptical and inquisitive. He has a lot of, data to back it up. And so he brought like the science-y version of himself to Rogan. On InfoWars, he was full in like Great Reset, New World Order, World Economic Forum. He really kind of let it all hang out there. So put that to the side and we'll get to more of that in a moment. The reason that a lot of people are now talking about this and paying attention is because YouTube took down all of the clips of the interview that Malone did with Rogan. This also, he did the interview, it was like a day after Twitter had banned his account.
Permanently.
So Twitter and YouTube both censoring what Robert Malone is ultimately saying. Let's go ahead and throw the Daily Mail tear sheet up on the screen here. They say YouTube and Twitter delete Joe Rogan interview with scientists who helped invent mRNA vaccines. Dr. Robert Malone claimed U.S. is now like Nazi Germany, with society hypnotized to believe in vaccines and extreme pandemic measures. The quote that they're referring to there, which was part of what was very controversial about what he was saying on Rogan's podcast, as he said, quote, it was from basically European intellectual inquiry into what the heck happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s. Very intelligent, highly educated population, and they went barking mad. And how did that happen? The answer is mass formation psychosis. When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety in a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it, and then their attention gets focused by a leader or series of events on one small point. Just like hypnosis, they literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere. Okay, so that was part of what was so controversial about what he was saying.
And the clips specifically, which were taken off and censored. Yeah.
Yes, very true. So let me start with the part that, actually all of this to me is fairly straightforward, but we have a very clear stance on this show. I think, and I'm going to get into this more, I do think that this individual is irresponsible. I think he only focuses exclusively on the risks. I think he cherry picks his evidence with regards to what he wants to say about the vaccine, does not focus at all on the benefits. In some areas, he's very misleading in the claims that he makes, even as he's a very sophisticated person. But he shouldn't be censored.
Obviously.
And this whole direction, we talked about this with Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday. Do I like Marjorie Taylor Greene? No, I don't like Marjorie Taylor. I think she's been irresponsible with regard to coronavirus too. Do I think that the appropriate response to that, an effective response to that even, is to censor and deplatform and ban, et cetera? No. And in some instances, as we've covered, deplatforming does actually work to suppress certain people and minimize them. In this instance, though, and I think with Marjorie Taylor Greene too, it's having the polar opposite effect. Like, if you didn't want people to hear what this dude said, congratulations. I wasn't going to listen to what he said, but now I want to listen to all like freaking 4 hours of his interviews. You're making this guy into a star. It's the same thing with the way that they have this sort of like Ron DeSantis derangement syndrome and like
you're making him president.
You are making these people because you're validating what is part of Malone's message. It's, oh, this information is so dangerous to the establishment. They don't want you to hear it. They want to censor this. They want to allow this conversation. And then you go out and validate exactly what he is saying in terms of like, oh, they're just so afraid of this information being out there. In a healthy society, if you are confident in the views that you hold, and I am very confident in my view that for most people, the risks of getting the vaccine are much less than the benefits that you'll derive, and we'll put up some charts in a moment. If you're confident in that position, be confident enough to go and have the conversation, have the debate, put your viewpoint out there like Sanjay Gupta did when he went on with Joe Rogan.
Which was very useful.
Yes, or like I was thinking too about the type of conversations that Brianna Joy Gray has been having on her podcast with people who are, sometimes problematic or controversial, where she's not afraid to engage with them and debate with them and expose where their views are silly sometimes or wrong. And that defangs it so much. You shouldn't be afraid of information. You shouldn't be afraid of having this debate. You shouldn't be afraid of things that are even wrong or misleading. If you're confident in your view, go out and have the debate and tell them why they are wrong.
I completely agree. And you know, I listened to both Peter McCullough and to Robert Malone, and I learned some things from some of them. I actually believe some of what they were saying was correct, which was that there absolutely was a campaign in the early days to shut down discussion of therapeutic and to move people towards vaccination. On the substance of vaccination itself, and this actually gets to what also annoys me about Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone. Look, the data is pretty clear. They like to talk about data. This one is clear as day. Let's put it up there. This is from Derek Thompson. I mean, look at this. We are talking about a risk of hospitalization across every single age group, which is dramatically reduced from vaccination. Now, that is a fact. But look, it is true that there does seem to be a deep discomfort of people to acknowledge some basic facts, which is that from the beginning, yes, we were sold a message that COVID vaccines would prevent you from getting COVID for a variety of reasons around breakthrough, Delta, Omicron, and all that. That seems to be, the effect of that has been reduced very much over time, certainly not with what the expectation was there. However, the hospitalization and death one is certainly there. In terms of the adverse effects, simply right now in the data, there is no reliable way to know. The VAERS system often is reported by healthcare workers and others. Some say it could be underreported as much as 1%. Some people say that it's not reliable. I have no idea. It's not my job from the FDA. The number one thing that I actually take away from this, Krystal, is that pharma is such a cancer upon our healthcare system that from now to the future, we have to abolish so much of their control because it actually makes it so that people have legitimate reason to be suspect. Another thing I did not know until listening to Dr. Peter McCullough and Robert Malone, and also I'm blanking on his name, the guy who did the sickening episode around Big Pharma.
John Abramson.
John Abramson, which was that, once again, I had no idea, was that whenever it comes to the actual data that is turned over for peer-reviewed journals, that data is actually owned by Big Pharma, who conduct the trials themselves, and that the quality control over the actual raw data itself is not turned over, which means that they can try and screw with data in different ways, that they've been caught doing so in court cases, for example, like Vioxx. That is something which is dramatically reducing public trust in all of this. So to me, my main takeaway is it is very clear that the vaccine works. It is very clear also that uncomfortable conversations are being dramatically censored off of YouTube, Twitter, and more, which is fueling a lot of people's conspiracy. And third, which is that the core of it to me is that the pharma control over the data and more has to end. It just has to, in order to restore any confidence in our health.
I mean, listen, I agree with the problems of pharma, obviously, and the problems of profit within our medical system writ large, which has led to, for us in the US, some of the worst health outcomes in the developed world, the worst health outcomes at the highest cost. Yeah. You are being price gouged to be kept sick and with, chronic conditions. Like, that is what our system incentivizes. They make the most money when you are chronically ill. And so guess what? We have a population that at disproportionate levels is chronically ill. Those problems, very real problems of profit incentive corrupting the entire pharmaceutical industry and the entire healthcare industry, create also a hotbed for conspiracy theories and mistrust. So that is a big part. And if you agree with that, and I think that most of our audience does, you should be pushing for some sort of single-payer healthcare, some way to get the profit motive out of the center of our healthcare system. That's also part of my frustration with people like this guy. He wants to sow all this, upset about what's going on in our system, but they never go that extra step to saying, like, here's why we need to reform our healthcare system in X and Y and Z way, in particular with something like Medicare for All or some sort of system that brings us closer to where the rest of the developed world ultimately is. But I want to bring this back to the substance of what he's saying, because I think this is really important. And again, I think that Dr. Malone is one of the more sophisticated actors in this zone of, a lot of people really resist the sort of anti-vax label, but when the bulk of your argument, when 90% of your argument is about why the vaccine is dangerous and that's all that you focus on, I really don't care if you yourself are personally vaccinated. He says he is, but he also says he regrets getting it. The substance of the arguments that you're making, yeah, you are leading people to be way more skeptical of the vaccine than they should be. He says in the Rogan podcast, he says, I believe in informed consent. That means people knowing about both the cost and the risks, but also the benefits. But he only talks about the risks.
Yes.
And so now listen, what I've heard other people say, and I don't know if he would make this argument or not, is like, yeah, but everybody else is talking about the benefits. So let them talk about, I'm just gonna focus on this part because it's being under-talked about, it's not being discussed enough. But the problem is when people really trust you, and there are a lot of people who really trust this guy and are really looking for his guidance and believe, especially because he did have a hand in development of mRNA technology, that this is someone who is incredibly credible and they're gonna, really take his word for what they should do with their body. If you are only yourself presenting the part on the risks, then a lot of people aren't going to believe the other part of the benefits even exists. So it's incumbent on you when you're in a position like him, where you have a lot of people who trust you and are looking to you for guidance, to present yourself the complete picture of the risks, yes, which frankly, as far as we know, are relatively minimal, and the benefits, which are very, very clear. At this point in the pandemic, we do have enough data from enough places, not just here in the US where our healthcare system is completely screwed up, but at other countries around the world, and the findings are remarkably consistent. If you are vaccinated, you receive significant protection. Your risk of being hospitalized at every demographic, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what country you're in, are about 10 times less of being hospitalized if you are vaccinated. So ultimately, listen, if you listen to the podcast, it's 3 hours long. There's a lot of information there. It can feel like, I'm getting overwhelmed with all of this data, information, and these stories in this country and that country and whatever. It's ultimately very simple if you look at those charts that we put up on the screen from Derek Thompson. The vaccines provide a lot of benefit against severe hospitalization and death. That is the most important piece of data. So don't get sort of snowed by all of the things that are thrown at you in those 3 hours. That's the most critical piece of information to understand.
I agree. And this also comes down to, I think Rogan himself has discussed it, and he has the biggest platform, so he's probably the person who can make it happen. I do think somebody like Sanjay Gupta, somebody like the TV Peter Hotez, or any of these virologists.
Yeah, don't be afraid of this guy.
They shouldn't be afraid. Go and talk with him, please. I am begging you, in order to see exactly this, the balance. Somebody put that chart up and be like, hey, what do you make of this then, right? I mean, this is the lack of discussion, and it also, the selective coverage, I think, on the media as well is very bad. And because you lead to people thinking like, oh, well, nobody, I saw CNN yesterday saying new study shows, if you're obese, you're more likely to be from COVID. I'm like, new? Like, known this since April of 2020. Whenever things get ignored in order to, propagate a single solution, and then the people who are distrustful of that solution see that, those things being ignored, it makes them feel correctly as if all the facts are not being presented to people. I also believe in informed consent. I wish that doctor and Peter McCullough also would provide people with, these charts and prevent a balanced picture of what's happening. I accept the argument, oh, well, you hear it from everybody else. But, whenever you're talking on both sides of this, you need to try and present that fullness. So that's what we think. I think I think it's outrageous that the man should be taken off of Twitter and of YouTube, that he did ultimately invent the mRNA platform and some of the technology. I think he has a right to say everything that he has been. And I think that the debate around this is very needed. If these doctors are becoming world famous, a lot of these guys are on MSNBC all of the time, do something useful and sit down with this guy or Peter McCullough and be like, no, this is why I think you're wrong. You would be
so much more the thing that, that exchange between Sanjay Gupta and Rogan was one of the best
it really was.
Conversations that we've seen in this regard, because people have a lot of reasons to be skeptical and uncomfortable that are legitimate. Our healthcare system does suck. People have had bad experiences with the medical system. You have been lied to. I mean, some of it, we just learned this week about these prenatal tests
Oh my
from the New York
God. Yeah, we
Times.
were talking about this yesterday.
That,
Right.
you know, I had when I was pregnant with my second, I think both of my second two, that you're told, like, they're going to tell you whether you have these rare conditions. And they're wildly
Like
inaccurate.
90% wrong. You're
Like
wait,
90%
Yeah.
of the positive instances end up being incorrect. And there's very little disclosure about it. So bottom line is people have good reasons for feeling skeptical and nervous about the information that you're being provided. Trying to censor and kick off platforms and shut down and pull the clips and all this stuff, you are only adding fuel to the fire. You are only feeding their narrative that these views are uncomfortable and they don't want the truth to come out and all of these things. So much better to engage and debate and not be afraid of having the exchange. If you're confident in your views, don't be afraid of having the exchange. That is ultimately my bottom line here.
That's right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.